All right, today we're going to be reading The Long Exile by Leo Tolstoy. Here on your screen, you see the presentation that most students completed on Leo Tolstoy. So let's take a look at some of this information. First of all, Tolstoy was born in 1828 and died in 1910. So basically, he lived during the early 1800s, and so you guys will need to just keep in mind that times were a lot different back then. He was born in Russia, and most of his stories often take place in Russia. He was the youngest of four boys. His mom died when he was 2. His dad died when he was 9. So he was a lonely soul. He lived with different relatives over the years, different aunts and what have you. As far as Tolstoy's professional and work history, the greatest thing that he wrote, his greatest work was Anna Karenina. It's a very famous book, and some of you may or may not read it. As far as his occupations, he actually enrolled in an Oriental language program when he was younger, and that didn't work out for him. So then he enrolled in a law program. That didn't work out for him. He tried his hand at being a farmer, and that didn't work. And then ultimately, he did join the military and became a soldier. His job in the military was a junker, so like he worked on cars and mechanical types of things. And then the question is, what book did he write before Anna Karenina? And that book was War and Peace, and that is a famous work that he is well known for. Now, this information you copied regarding his religious conversion. It says that despite the success of Anna Karenina following the novel's completion, Tolstoy suffered a spiritual crisis and grew depressed. Struggling to uncover the meaning of life, Tolstoy first went to the Russian Orthodox Church, but did not find the answers he sought there. He came to believe that Christian churches were corrupt and, in lieu of organized religion, developed his own beliefs. He decided to express those beliefs by founding a new publication called The Mediator in 1883. As a consequence of espousing his unconventional and therefore controversial spiritual beliefs, Tolstoy Tolstoy was ousted by the Russian Orthodox Church, which means they kicked him out because he believed a little bit differently than they did. He was even watched by the secret police. When Tolstoy's new beliefs prompted his desire to give away his money, his wife strongly objected. The disagreement put a strain on the couple's marriage until Tolstoy begrudgingly agreed to a compromise. He conceded to granting his wife the copyrights and presumably the royalties to all his writings predating 1881. So, in other words, he had this religious conversion, and it made him want to give all his money away and live like this meager life. And his wife got really mad about it. So, what he did is he agreed to make sure that she got all the money that he made from the books that he had written. Now, later on in his elder years, over the last 30 years of his life, Tolstoy established himself as a moral and religious leader. His ideas about nonviolent resistance to evil influenced the likes of social leader Mahatma Gandhi. So he was known as a very religious person. And again, he influenced very famous people. A little bit of information about Russia. The capital of Russia is Moscow. The biggest city in Russia is Moscow. As far as how big is Russia compared to the United States, it's about 1.8 times the size of the United States. Russian life in the 19th century was most citizens lived in tiny little villages and they weren't able to travel much. And you might have found something else in your reading, but that's what I captured. And we're going to see that in the story that we read that the main character comes from a tiny village. As far as the temperatures in Moscow, in the winter and summer, the summer it can get in the lower 90s, just like it can here, but the average is normally 66. So their summers are traditionally much cooler on average than ours. And the winter it gets minus 40. We don't even know what that is here. Like we can't even comprehend that. But on the average, it's normally about 14 degrees. So pick our coldest day, and that's what it's like almost all the time in Russia. On the screen here, you see a map of Russia. Our main character in our story is actually going to be sent to prison in Siberia. So if you look at where you see the word Russia and then look directly above it, like go north, you'll see the location Siberia. So it's like on the outermost part. It's kind of a deserted kind of area, and that's where people go when they're in prison. So not much there, but just hard labor. So that's some background information on Leo Tolstoy. And at the end of our reading, you're going to be asked to draw connections between his life and the main character's life, Askenov. And so just keep that in mind and keep referring back to your projects. Let's go ahead and move on to the reading of the story now. All right, before we actually begin reading the story, I want everybody to make sure that they pull up their Long Exile study guide in front of them. It looks like this. It's in your Google Classroom. And then you're going to take out one of the dark emerald green books and turn to page 805. If you need to pause the video, you can do so. If not, let's go ahead and get started. The Long Exile. Once upon a time, there lived in the city of Vladimir a young tradesman named Askanov. He had 2 shops and a house. Askanov had a ruddy complexion and curly hair. He was a very jolly fellow and a good singer. When he was young, he used to drink too much, and when he was tipsy, he was turbulent. But after his marriage, he ceased drinking and only occasionally had a spree. So he was a little bit wild in his younger days. Continuing on. One summer, Askanov was going to Nisya to the great fair. As he was about to bid his family goodbye, his wife said to him, "Ivan Dmitrovich, do not start today. I dream that some misfortune befell you." Now, that's a different name than what we just read. Just like some of you guys have nicknames and you don't necessarily go by your legal name, same thing here. His legal name is probably Ivan Dmitrovich, but they call him Askanov. So, same guy. Continuing on. Askanov laughed at her and said, "Ah, are you still afraid that I shall go on a spree at the fair?" And his wife said, "I myself know not what I'm afraid of, but I had such a bad dream. You seemed to be coming home from town, and you took off your hat, and I looked, and your head was all gray." Askanov laughed. "That means good luck. See, I am going now, and I will bring you some rich remembrances." So, like, some rich trinkets, some gifts or whatever. And he bade his family farewell and set off. So let's go ahead and stop for a minute and answer study guide question number 1. Why does Askanov's wife beg him not to go to the fair? If you need to pause the video, do so. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going. So, again, he bade his family farewell and he set off. On page 806. When he had gone half his journey, he fell in with a tradesman who was an acquaintance of his, and the two stopped at the same tavern for the night. They took tea together and went to sleep in adjoining rooms. Askanov did not care to sleep long. He awoke in the middle of the night. In order that he might get a good start while it was cold, he aroused his driver and bade him harness up, went down into the smoky hut, settled his account with the landlord, and started on his way. Now, guys, that's a little bit weird. I mean, when you guys check into a hotel or an inn, do you check out really early or do you stay as long as you possibly can? I'm guessing he probably checked out like 5 o'clock in the morning. So that's a little strange, but there you go. After he had driven 40 versts, he again stopped to get something to eat. He rested in the vestibule of the inn, and when it was noon, he went to the doorstep and ordered the samovar got ready. Then he took out his guitar and began to play. Suddenly, a troika with a bell dashed up to the inn, and from the equipage leaped an official with 2 soldiers. He came directly up to Askanov and said, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" Askanov answered without hesitation and asked him if he would not like to have a glass of tea with him. But the official kept on with his questions. "Where did you spend last night? Were you alone or with the merchant? Have you seen the merchant this morning? Why did you leave so early this morning?" Askanov wondered why he was questioned so closely, but he told everything just as it was and asked, "Why do you put so many questions to me? I'm not a thief or a murderer. I'm on my own business. There's nothing to question me about." Then the official called up the soldiers and said, "I am the police inspector, and I have made these inquiries of you because the merchant with whom you spent last night has been stabbed. Show me your things. And you men, search him." They went into the tavern, bought in the trunk and bag, and began to open and search them. Suddenly, the police inspector pulled out from the bag a knife and demanded, "Whose knife is this?" Askanov looked and saw a knife covered with blood taken from his bag, and he was frightened. "And whose blood is this on the knife?" Askanov tried to answer, but he could not articulate his words. I don't know. That knife, it is not mine." Then the police inspector said, "This morning the merchant was found stabbed to death in his bed. No one except you could have done it. The tavern was locked on the inside, and there was no one in the tavern except yourself. And here is the bloody knife in your bag, and your guilt is evident in your face. Tell me how you killed him, and how much money you took from him." Askanov swore that he had not done it, that he had not seen the merchant after he had drunk tea with him, that the only money that he had with him, 8,000 rubles was his own and that the knife was not his. But his voice trembled and his face was pale and he was all quivering with fright, like a guilty person. The police inspector called the soldiers and commanded them to bind Askinov and take him in the wagon. When they took him to the wagon with his feet tied, Askinov crossed himself and burst into tears. They confiscated Askinov's things and his money and took him to the next city and threw him into prison. They sent to Vladimir to make inquiries about Askinov's character, and all the merchants and citizens of Vladimir declared that Askinov, when he was young, used to drink and was wild, but that now he was a worthy man. Then he was brought up for judgment. All right, let's go ahead and stop here and answer a couple questions. Question number 2 on the study guide said, what does the police inspector accuse Askinov of? So if you need to pause and do that, do so. Number 3 asks, what evidence did the police have in their case against Askinov? So again, if you need to pause, go ahead and do that. If not, we're going to continue on. On page 807 at the very top. He was sentenced for having killed the merchant and for having robbed him of 20,000 rubles. Askinov's wife was dumbfounded by the event and did not know what to think. Her children were still small, and there was one at the breast. She took them all with her and journeyed to the city where her husband was imprisoned. At first, they would not grant her admittance, but afterwards she got permission from the Natchaliks and was taken to her husband. When she saw him in his prison garb and chains together with murderers, she fell to the floor, and it was a long time before she recovered from her swoon. Then she placed her children around her, sat down amid them, and began to tell him about their domestic affairs and to ask him about everything that had happened to him. He told her the whole story. She asked, what is to be done now? And he said, we must petition the Tsar. It is impossible that an innocent man should be condemned. The wife said that she had already sent in the petition to the Tsar, but the petition had not been granted. Askinov said nothing, but was evidently very much downcast. Then his wife said, you see, the dream I had when I dreamed that you had become gray-headed meant something after all. Already your hair has begun to turn gray with trouble. You ought to have stayed at home that time. And she began to tear her hair, and she said, Vanya, my dearest husband, tell your wife the truth. Did you commit that crime? And Askinov said, so you, too, have no faith in me. Let's go ahead and answer question number 4 now. Why does Askinov's wife question him about the murder? Why does she question him? What prompted her to do that? All right, picking up, page number 808. And he wrung his hands and wept. And then a soldier came and said that it was time for the wife and children to go. And Askinov for the last time bade his family farewell. When his wife was gone, Askinov began to think over all that they had said. When he remembered that his wife had also distrusted him and had asked him if he had murdered the merchant, he said to himself, it is evident that no one but God can know the truth of the matter, and he is the only one to ask for mercy, and he is the only one from whom to expect. When I read that passage right there, I think about the background information that we learned about Leo Tolstoy and how he was so religious and how he had had this religious conversion. And just like Tolstoy, Askinov did too. He was kind of a turbulent man in his youth, just a regular, ordinary kind of merchant guy. But then he experienced this, and he's actually like calling out to God. So continuing on page 808. And from that time, Askinov ceased to send in petitions, he ceased to hope, and only prayed to God. Askinov was sentenced to be knouted, and then to exile with hard labor. And so it was done. He was flogged with the knife. He was flogged with the knot, and then, when the wounds from the knot were healed, he was sent with other exiles to Siberia. Askinov lived 26 years in the mines. Let's go ahead and stop here. So let's go ahead and answer question number 5, excuse me. After his wife's visit, what are Askinov's thoughts and feelings about his situation? The answer to that question is directly on page 808. After his wife left, what did he think? And then I want you guys to just kind of stop where we are here in the story and answer what external conflicts had occurred in the story thus far and what internal conflicts have occurred. And if you've forgotten information about external and internal conflicts, you can always go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Remember that we learned in our conflict and theme notes that there are two kinds of conflicts. There's external conflict, where a character struggles against an outside force, which may be another character, society as a whole, or something in nature. And I think Askinoff has experienced some external conflicts. And then the other type of conflict is internal conflict. An internal conflict is a struggle between opposing needs, desires, or emotions within a single character. So what we just read was actually an internal conflict for Askinoff. He struggled with something, and then he made a decision to not do certain things. So look back on page 808. What are those things that he decided to not do any longer? And this was a result of an internal conflict. So let's go ahead and go back to our story. Again, pause this video anytime you need to. If you haven't finished putting in your external, internal conflicts, do that. So, picking back up on page 808 on the left-hand side, it again said, "And so it was done. He was flogged with the knout, and then, when the wounds from the knout were healed, he was sent with other exiles to Siberia. Askinoff lived 26 years in the mines. The hair on his head had become white as snow, and his beard had grown long, thin, and gray. All his gaiety had vanished. He was bent, and his gait was slow. He spoke little, he never laughed, and he spent much of his time in prayer. Askinoff had learned while in prison to make boots, and with the money that he earned, he bought the Book of Martyrs and used to read it when it was light enough in prison, and on holidays he would go to the prison church, read the Gospels, and sing in the choir, for his voice was still strong and good." The authorities liked Askinoff for his submissiveness, and his prison associates respected him and called him grandfather and the man of God. Whenever they had petitions to be presented, Askinoff was always chosen to carry them to the authorities, and when quarrels arose among the prisoners, they always came to Askinoff as umpire. Askinoff never received any letters from home, and he knew not whether his wife and children were alive. One time some new convicts came to the prison. In the evening all the old convicts gathered around the newcomers and began to ply them with questions as to the cities or villages from which this one or that one had come, and what their crimes were. At this time Askinoff also was sitting on his bunk near the strangers, and with bowed head was listening to what was said. One of the new convicts was a tall, healthy-looking old man of 60 years with a close-cropped gray beard. He was telling why he had been arrested, and he said, "And so, brothers, I was sent here for nothing. I unharnessed a horse from a postboy's sledge, and they caught me with it and insisted that I was stealing it. But I said I only wanted to go a little faster, so I whipped up the horse. And besides, the driver was a friend of mine. It's all right, I said. And no, they said, you were stealing it. But they did not know what and where I had actually stolen. I had done things which long ago would have sent me here, but I was not found out. And now they have sent me here without any justice in it. But what's the use of grumbling? I have been in Siberia before. They did not keep me here very long, though." "Where did you come from?" asked one of the convicts. "Well, we came from the city of Vladimir. We are citizens of that place. My name is Makar, and my father's name was Semyon." Askinoff raised his head and asked, "Tell me, Semyonovitch, have you ever heard of the Askinoffs, merchants in Vladimir City? Are they alive?" "Indeed, I have heard of them. They are rich merchants, though their father is in Siberia. It seems he was just like any of the rest of us sinners. And now tell me, grandfather, what were you sent here for?" Askinoff did not like to speak of his misfortune. He sighed and he said, 26 years ago, I was condemned to hard labor on account of my sins." Makar Semyonov said, "But what was your crime?" Askinoff replied, "So I must have deserved this." Isn't it funny how he wouldn't just tell him what the crime was? I feel like in Askinoff's mind, he's kind of rationalizing why he's there, like saying he must have committed some sin that God would want to have him in that prison for, even if it wasn't actually the murder. So continuing on. But he would not give any further particulars, and the other convicts, however, related why Askinoff had been sent to Siberia. They told how on the road someone had killed a merchant and put the knife into Askinoff's luggage, and how he had been unjustly punished for this. When Makar heard this, he glanced at Askinoff, slapped himself on the knees, and said, "Well, now this is wonderful. This is really wonderful. You've been growing old, grandfather." They began to ask what he thought was wonderful and where he had seen Askinoff, but Makar did not answer. He only repeated, "A miracle, boys! How wonderful that we should meet again here!" And when he said these words, it came over Askinoff that perhaps this man might know who had killed the merchant, and he said, "Did you ever hear of that crime, Semyonovitch, or did you ever see me before?" "Of course I heard of it. The country was full of it. But it happened a long time ago, and I've forgotten what I heard," said Makar. "Perhaps you heard who killed the merchant?" asked Askinoff, and Makar laughed and said, "Why, of course the man who had the knife in his bag killed him. It would have been impossible for anyone to put the knife in your things and not have been caught doing it. For how could the knife have been put in your bag? Was it not standing close by your head? And you would have heard it, wouldn't you?" As soon as Askinoff heard these words, he felt convinced that this was the very man who had killed the tradesman. He stood up and walked away, and all night he was unable to sleep. Deep melancholy came upon him, and he began to call back the past in his imagination. See, what happened is Makar actually revealed a detail that probably nobody else knows. And so, and the bag being next to his head, and so Askinoff immediately put two and two together. Continue on reading on page 810. He imagined his wife as she had been when for the last time she had accompanied him to the fair. She seemed to stand before him exactly as if she were alive, and he saw her face and her eyes, and he seemed to hear her words and her laugh. Then his imagination brought up his children before him, one a boy in a little fur coat and the other at his mother's breast. And he imagined himself as he was at that time, young and happy. He remembered how he had sat on the steps of the tavern when they arrested him, and how he had played on his guitar, and how his soul was full of joy at that time. And he remembered the place of execution where they had flogged him, and the executioner and the people standing around, and the chains and the convicts, and all his 26 years of prison life, and he remembered his old age. And such melancholy came upon Askinoff that he was tempted to put an end to himself. "And all on account of this criminal," said Askinoff to himself. And then he began to feel such anger against Makar Semyonov that he almost lost himself and was crazy with desire to pay off the load of vengeance. He repeated prayers all night but could not recover his calm. When day came, he walked by Makar and did not look at him. Thus we passed 2 weeks. At night Askinoff was not able to sleep, and such melancholy had come over him that he did not know what to do. One time during the night, as he happened to be passing through the prison, he saw that the soil was disturbed under one of the bunks. He stopped to examine it, and suddenly Makar crept from under the bunk and looked at Askinoff with a startled face. Askinoff was about to pass on so as not to see him, but Makar seized his arm and told him how he had been digging a passage under the wall, and how every day he carried the dirt out in his boot legs and emptied it in the street when they went out to work. And he said, "If you only keep quiet, old man, I'll get you out too. But if you tell on me, they will flog me, but after I will make it hot for you. I will kill you." When Askinoff saw the man who had injured him, he trembled all over with rage, twitched away his arm, and said, "I have no reason to make my escape, and to kill me would do no harm. You killed me long ago, but as to telling on you or not, I shall do as God sees fit to have me." So let's go ahead and stop here and answer some study guide questions. Study guide question number 7 says, how many years did Askinoff work in the mines? So if you're not sure about the answer to that one, go back and refer to page number 808, I believe. Number 8, while Askinoff was in prison, what type of person did he become? And again, you'll want to refer back to page 808. Number 9, why is Askinoff so angry at Makar? Well, we just read that, so if you're not sure, go back through the reading. And then number 10, what does Askinoff mean when he says that Makar killed him long ago? So at this point, go ahead and get down the answers to study guide questions 1 through 10. When you're done, what you're going to do is you're going to finish reading the rest of the story, and you're going to answer all these study guide questions on your own. So again, you're going to pick up your reading on page number 11, and you're going to answer questions 11 through 18. 11 says, why doesn't Askinoff confess that Makar dug the hole? Number 12, what does Makar do after finding out that Askinoff did not tell on him? 13, why is Askinoff allowed to go home? And 14, why doesn't Askinoff return home? And then you'll want to complete questions 15 through 18 on your own.